Hello, I'm Chloe and welcome to Tycoon Talks. Today is a very special episode in honor of Women's History Month. Joining me as our co-host today is Heather Rametta, who is the COO of Database Tycoon. And we have three incredible guests with us today. Dori Wilson, who is the head of data and growth at Recce, Sarah Shafey, who is an AI and cloud digital executive at Google, and Lesley Greene, who is the field engineering leader at DBT Labs. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
So what I really want to know from all of you here is the origin story of how you got into data and tech. Like, not just the, the LinkedIn narrative, but I'm talking about, really think of what your first interest in data and tech came from.
It took me a long time to get into the data tech space in my actual career, but as a kid, I actually had it was my first or second grade teacher actually told my mom that I was going to be very good at math because I loved doing puzzles. And it turns out she was right. I was a math major in undergrad. I have always been very drawn to, I like the black and white kind of, the numbers don't lie, even though we now all know you can lie with data however you want. But the fact that it's just the logic and that side of things, I always really liked. I was also an English major, so I always liked having this little bit of a dichotomy of the two sides of things. And I didn't actually end up in data as a job or even math-related roles until I was working in startups, and I found that to do my job, I needed to learn how to get the data. Nobody else was giving me the information I wanted to make smart decisions. And so I just, in one of my roles, it wasn't part of my job, but I had one of the data people teach me SQL and just leaned into figuring out how to use data so that I could do the work that I wanted to do in my operations role. And over time, that just kept building, and I eventually found my way to probably where I should have been the whole time.
I got into data visualization in college as a journalism major, and so that's kind of what kickstarted my love of tech. But the real love of tech actually came from my coding days on MySpace. That's where I learned HTML and JavaScript.
I love that every time I meet other people, especially women in tech, there's just such a diverse set of backgrounds as to how people got to where they are. So it's fun to hear your stories. As a kid, I was definitely super into figuring out the back end of any new computer that we got, and trying any code that would get me into these secret games on the original computers. And so I've always had a penchant for just trying to figure things out like a puzzle. But I have definitely a different background where I ended up working in the music industry for a very long time. And at some point, as an audio engineer and mixer. And so at some point, I was still doing a lot of technical things from that perspective. But I felt like I could do more with my brain, essentially, at that point in time. And so I just thought, what could I do as a next profession in my life? And I was really good at figuring out music programs. And so I was like, maybe there's something to that. And so I went back to school for software engineering, which has then essentially led me down the path that I'm on right now. And while I don't necessarily work specifically in data, meaning I manage teams who are data scientists, data analysts, engineers, AI engineers. There was a point in time where I did work as a manager of data analytics, and I learned a lot. And so I just really value and appreciate what comes along with data. It basically speaks volumes for where we're headed. And a different story, but it's fun path.
I'm Dori, and so I got into data science via way of economics. I've been, similar to Lesley, interested in kind of source of truth, and that mathematically, quantitatively is a way to get there. I cared a lot about policy. I still care a lot about policy, but I started off getting a job at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, being a research associate in their economics research department. So it was really cool, doing a lot of awesome work. Also realized policy work can be screaming into a void at times. The best analysis can be done, but if policymakers, business people don't hear you, then it can be really disheartening. But I was then in San Francisco. I grew up in the South. Data science isn't a thing. Tech isn't a thing.
and I learned, like these favorite things I loved about economics, right? Taking squishy qualitative problems and getting to answers quantitatively, I can do in data science much faster, see answers, and businesses typically care a lot more about what the data is telling them.
It's so amazing to me every time how different everyone comes to this world of data, and how we're just like, we all wind up in this room and we are all looking for truth. And just hearing all of your paths here is so interesting to me. I guess I want to know what you're all working on. What are you curious about? What excites you these days in your work? And is there a project that you want to share about?
I've been really digging into how, and this probably makes sense with Recce, how can I make AI more accurate when it is building and generating code in our analytics repo? And so I've gone down a rabbit hole of skill development basically skill development and context management, about how can I structure skills that are super personalized to our system and our metrics and what we care about, our structure, and then how to bake in context, whether it's inline in the code itself, in the cloud memory files, in other files that the skills call, such that it can be accurate as it generates code or is debugging something.
Yeah, Dori, you and I were just talking about this at DataTune. We were trying to develop a skill around the content repo, which I've been working on, and it's so crazy what you can do. Dori's kind of the queen of this, so if anyone has Claude skill questions, or just like in general, I feel like you think of things, you're very creative with it. So go to Dori for for that sort of thing.
Thank you. I'll a little bit echo what Dori is saying. This is like less a project that I'm working on and more just maybe a project I should be working on. I think that there is just such a really exciting moment right now when it comes to how quickly everything is changing, and particularly in data. There's a thing happening right now where I've been around this space for a long time, and for a long time, I think the data analysts or the data engineers often felt like they were the second-class citizens when it comes to like the software engineering world, or it was like, oh, you do the dashboards, you do the BI. But now we're really in a moment where everybody's realizing their database and like the work that the data teams do and the way that we think about data engineering that's what determines whether or not all of these AI projects are successful or not successful, right? Like the context is everything. And so I think there's just a really, really exciting moment for people that are in data right now to really be a part of the forefront and be part of the leaders as all of this is getting determined. And so I think there's something really exciting there. And then the other piece I'll say about this, because this is the women's panel. I was on a panel last year with Pooja Crane, who's at Okta, and she said something that has just really, really stuck with me, that right now we have this moment where everybody's at like ground zero. Everybody is new to all of the things to do with AI, right? Like nobody has created agents before. Nobody has leaned into understanding how skills work or what the right way is to do this. And so it's this really rare moment where there isn't a bunch of people that already have the step up or like that are ahead. And so particularly for women, there's this opportunity right now for everybody to choose to be at the forefront and to choose to be leaders, because there's no barrier there, because nobody else has those years of experience ahead of you or has already been given those opportunities. So I think in my actual job, I don't use AI as much as I should and like don't tell my bosses, but I do think like we're at a moment, there is something really exciting that people can choose to lean into. And so I'll put it as my project I want to work on more.
Lesley, how is that playing out for you specifically in your role right now?
So in my role right now, I work with all of our customers at DBT Labs. And so I think there's a big part of this that's just like, this is what every customer wants to talk about. Every customer is realizing the importance of context and how they can build on top of that and how we can integrate the work that they do with DBT into that broader sphere. And then there's also in the day-to-day, right? Like how do I and the other people in our roles use it to make ourselves more efficient and more effective.
Totally. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Sure.
What are you working on these days?
Yeah, I mean, also, not necessarily specific projects, but just thinking about what Lesley was just saying. I think every program that I work on right now is an AI program, and so I think what's been really interesting, and I'm still thankful and grateful that I worked in data analytics before, is like I do echo what you're saying, Lesley, is the data engineers and the data analysts this is like their starring moment at this point in time, because for every one of these major AI implementations and programs, it's just like the data is like that's really what's ultimately going to make it successful or not successful. And so there's a huge amount of education that I'm having to do, and we're having to do with our clients right now, who think AI is like this magic tool that's going to just, you press a button and it does it does everything for them. But at the end of the day, like
it's a black box.
It's a black box. And so, so it's just like I'm really heavily getting back into the data and working with our engineers and analysts, because they're giving us like a dump of their data into BigQuery, and there's so many gaps, and it's coming from public sources. It's like, how can we then like use AI to clean that up, to figure out how to join these tables in a more efficient manner? Because ultimately, to our clients, like, this is the work that we need to do to get you to where you want to get. And so like the first, couple of months are always spent just everybody's like honed in on the data, quality, cleaning, all that sort of fun stuff. So it's been pretty interesting to get back into that.
Totally. It's actually the perfect lead in. I think we're all talking about AI, and this is so much we're centering our work around it, especially with data. What keeps coming up for me is obviously the question of ethics in AI, but more specifically recently, it's been around bias. And I'm curious also, like, what practices are we already doing pre-AI? Like, at what stage of the data lifecycle is bias slipping in? But more than ever now, like, AI is inheriting everything that it's trained on. So I guess, do you have any practices or tools that you're using to detect bias in the data systems? And do you see AI helping us mitigate this in the future, or potentially is it going to amplify this issue?
So our work right now, because it's just data validation, it's not as concerned for us seeing the bias. I'll say a tip to everyone out there is, when you're using any type of chatbot or AI, if you're a woman and it has memory of you, ask it to tell you what would it say if you were a man. That's always fun. And 2, start a new chat with whatever you're thinking about responding with or saying, and pretend it's what somebody said to you and see what it responds. So I think that's one way to deal with bias, because they want to give you the correct answer. So I think you just need to challenge them and think about ways of having it shift its framing in order to uncover any biases it has, whether that's gendered or it just wants to please you.
That's a great tip, Dori. I never thought to ask the AI to answer me as if I were a different person.
Yep.
When you change the chatbot over to speak to you like you're a man, like, what specifically, what did you notice was the difference?
So I was giving feedback to a teammate, and its thing was like, this is coming off aggressive. And it wanted to soften it up. And I was like, that's where it set off things of like, it knows my pronouns. I wonder what would happen. And so when I said, what advice would you give me if you thought I was a man? It all of a sudden didn't think it was too aggressive or soft. And then if you put it where somebody, it's like, and then I took it because I was like, okay, well, now it's prompted because it's like, oh, you're right, I had gender bias. So then it was prompting itself for gender bias, so that it's going to overreact the other way potentially. So that's when I started taking it and doing it in a totally new chat where I'm like, hey, my teammate just sent this to me as feedback. What's your take? To get like, how would it read it as a more unbiased, where it's truly not filtering through either thinking I'm a woman or thinking that it's being biased. Wow. So then potentially biasing the other way.
This is wild. I'm not surprised. I mean, are we surprised? But also just, that's exactly, you're just talking specifically about this implicit bias that I'm hoping to get at. And if it's in our chat agents, then it's in our coding agents, and there's just so many layers.
Yep. Well, I mean, I don't know how many of us in this room, but have gotten feedback about, you know, you need to be nicer about this. You should soften this up when you're just being direct.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm just giving you a statement. And then to have the chatbot say it. And then when it's like feedback coming to me, it's like, oh, this is nice, direct feedback, actionable. Is frustrating, but also just like, another way we got to work within a system.
I spend a lot of time thinking about this because I'm like, what's the solution here? It doesn't seem to be changing. Ultimately, having things like this where it's us talking about this out loud, because I know other people feel the same way, other women feel the same way, but also ethics in AI and ensuring that as we start to build out whatever it is that we're doing from an AI perspective, it seems to be an afterthought in many cases, especially for, in the startup world. And it's like, it's extremely important that that's built into the foundation as like one of the very first things that we're talking about before we start building a new AI program, whatever it may be. And so, and we need women and men on those, those councils or, in those conversations. And so I hope that makes a difference. Maybe not a huge difference, but it's something.
I think, Dori, you just said this is like, it's just like one more way we have to like work within the system, which I think is just, we all know that that's the reality that we live in. I had never thought about, I want to go back to my history and ask it to retell me everything that it's ever told me to say and be like, what if I was a man?
Yeah.
Like, I know what I'm doing this evening, but, that's such a fascinating idea. I think my overall, what I've learned from any of my usage is a big trick that's just like, give it the context that you want it to have and then tell it to ignore everything else. Like being very explicit about, I want you to use this context and not make up other context, or saying things like, this is the context I want you to use. And if you don't have the information you need to answer this question, don't make it up. Tell me you don't have the information you need. So just being really, really explicit in those sorts of prompts to say, like, sometimes you do want it to extrapolate or make things up, and that's fine. But other times you're like, no, I want you to like use the actual facts and then not fill in the gaps. So thinking about those sorts of instructions is where I've tried to lean into making sure that it's on the guardrails. And I think especially in data, there's interesting parts here around the fact that these models, like by nature, are very good at predictive outcomes, but not good at deterministic outcomes. And that's often whenever we are talking to users that are trying to do more AI things with their data, that's often the problem. Is they're like, well, when we ask it the revenue, it tells us different numbers every time. And it's like, well, it's like just kind of making them up. That's a predictive model. You need to actually do things in order to give it the right context, make sure it's pulling the right context for what you're trying to do.
I guess like another follow-up question to you guys, it's like, have you guys noticed these like bottlenecks in process, and like what are your solutions to them?
Honestly, I think that there's still a ways to go from an AI perspective in terms of like the world's our limit in terms of like where it's headed. So not necessarily bottlenecks. I have noticed that like, yes, it can perform well, it can perform poorly. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But what I do find exciting, at least from an AI perspective, is like there's new models coming out like very fast in terms of like improving upon the previous model. And so that does excite me because I have seen like rapid improvement. Like it's gone up, it went down, and then it's going back up again. And I think it's heading in a positive direction in terms of us figuring out like how to fine tune essentially the results it's giving.
What changes have you guys seen in this industry for women, and where do we still have work to do?
I actually think that the just the prevalence of conversations like this is something that I've seen change a lot. And I think because maybe it's post-pandemic, like we've all gotten so much more comfortable with virtual communities. I think that there's also I've seen a lot more communities for women to come together, because it's like you don't need to just have the 3 people that happen to be in your city that can come together, but you can build that community over a broader geographic area. And so I think for minority groups, then it makes it so that you actually can get to that scale by doing it virtually. So I think that is one of the things that I've seen definitely change is just more women coming together to support each other, which I think is really important. I definitely, when I was younger in my career, I used to work in management consulting 7 lives ago, and they did a lot of like, oh, this is like the women's group, whatever. And I used to find it annoying. I used to think like, I was like, oh, you're just making us others. You're just pointing out the fact that there's fewer of us. And as I've gotten older and wiser, I've realized like, no, when those opportunities are there, you should lean into them and you should take them, because it is so important to build those connections and find other people that see themselves in you, because that just makes for natural connection and natural kind of mentorship and all of those things. So I think that's really, for me, the thing that I've seen the biggest change and that I think is very authentic is just more women coming together to support each other.
You know, I going back to what we were talking about before, like in terms of like, I leverage AI a lot now for, I call it data-driven accountability. So like when it comes to, for example, having conversations about something like pay parity for women, like we can now access like vast quantities of information around like these topics that we had to spend so long researching before. And so like when it comes time to have these conversations with your leadership, your whomever within your company or your organization, whoever, like I know that it's always not perfect results, and you have to fact check as a human, but like I just love that now I'm like, well, actually, and I'll like pull up a bunch of information on like stats related to how we're not there yet when it comes to parity for pay. So it's just like, I think that you can leverage it as a woman to help support these conversations that we have in these types of rooms as women, where we're like, I feel like this is happening, but before we didn't really necessarily have the information to support that. And so I think that's where data plays a huge role, especially when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because my thoughts and views have also evolved over the last 5 years. I think, you know, prior to working at Recce, I founded my own company and I was CEO. So I was pitching. That is a very different experience than being an IC or being in a management position where you're having to go and be in rooms and be like, I'm awesome. Here's why my vision's going to go to the moon. And you're lucky to go on board. Give me money. It's one of those things where I'm still, you know, Lesley, you're talking about, are we othered, you know, by being a female founder? Like, I don't want to be a female founder. I want to be a founder. Like, I'm not here. Like, I'm here because, like, you know, in those pitches, because I'm CEO and I have a vision and I want to do money, you know, and like being at Recce is great. Like, my founder vision, learned a lot. It ended. And I love working here. CL is great. He's a wonderful founder. He's super supportive. And I think it's about finding people, whatever gender that may be, that are supportive of you and building that out. And just being aware of performative, I think that can be difficult, performative metrics versus like, where are they doing? Like, some of the people that I've seen have not said a word about DEI, but then if you look at their investments, women and people of color across the board, right? So it's a lot more open looking. Like, don't tell me that you have women and like you care about women, like diversity. I want to see it in your leadership. Like, is there a woman in your executive committee that's in a non-traditional feminine role? Like, I've really started indexing on that a lot.
Dori, I thank you for sharing that. I very much feel that too. And to what you ladies said too, the other day we were at DataTune and someone asked Steven, who's our founder, what is it like? Is it intentional that he has so many women on the team? And I found that question very disappointing. And like aggravating for me as a woman on Steven's team and as the COO. You know, it's not my goal to be hired as a woman and to be the woman that legitimizes the team, right? Like, I want to be seen for my thoughts and ideas. I want to be taken seriously. And so I feel that. I feel that in this industry. And I also look to other teams to lead with inviting more voices, marginalized voices in the room, and continuing to invite those voices to speak. So Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
I one time had an investor tell me that the reason, or he didn't say it was the reason, but in talking to me about a role, he mentioned that one of the reasons that they wanted to talk to me was because they needed to have more women in leadership in the company. And I was like, wow, this is the quickest no I've ever said. Like, I've heard everything. No, no, thank you.
Yep.
Hard no.
No.
No one wants to be a DEI hire. Not a single person.
We need to intentionally invite each other into the room and raise the voices of our marginalized communities. One of you mentioned that you used to avoid these kinds of conversations, Lesley. I think this was you, that you used to avoid these talks because, yeah, we're women in data. And like, do we need to be part of a special club and a special group? But no, but we do need to be talking about what happens and make it known and share with each other. And I feel very glad that we are having these conversations now, and we're in a place in time where we are, and it's not pushed back in the wayside.
I want the best person to be hired for the job without bias. I think it's just a fair opportunity in a world where I don't have to tell a chatbot, what would you say if I was a man? And then get a different answer. That's really what I would want, is just a fair shake. And if you're the best, you get hired. And if you're not, get better. Learn something from that, which we currently don't have, which is sad.
Yeah, I think if I were to talk to my younger self, and I do a lot of talks with, young women in STEM, it's just, I'm very honest with, what the industry and what they're, I think that's hugely valuable in terms of, we're all going to say the same thing, just being yourself. I spend, I think a lot of women that I've talked to spend a considerable amount of time, which from my perspective is wasted productivity on, am I saying this the right way? Am I doing this the right way? It's just like, no, what are we doing here? So it's just like,
nonstop.
I would love, yeah, nonstop. It's silly. And so it's just like, would love a world where, I'm straightforward. When we're working, you can be that way. And it's just, it's accepted in the same way that it is with your colleagues. And so that's the world I want. The one where you can just exist without spending that much time thinking about that type of thing.
You guys, this was such an amazing conversation. Probably one of my favorite days as the Tycoon Talks host ever. Thank you so much for tuning in to this very special edition of Tycoon Talks. If you are enjoying this content, there is a subscribe button down below. There's also links to all of our amazing panelists, their LinkedIns, and how to best get in contact with them.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
all. That was so fun. Thank you for doing that.